First, I must go back to the beginning of the year, where I was working as a pizza delivery boy for some local pizza shop near where I live. The money was awful, of course, but I was just trying to make a few bucks before college started back up again in the spring. On weekends, the pizza shop closes at midnight, with all deliveries stopping at 11:30, so the drivers can help clean up the shop. One Saturday night, a call came in around 11:45 and asked for a delivery. My boss was about to say that we don't deliver after 11:30, but the person ordered 8 large pizzas and wanted someone to drop them off at their house, which was located far away from the shop. My boss, being the cheapskate that he is, demanded the order to be made and delivered, because 8 large pizzas was a lot of money inside his pocket. Unfortunately for me, my boss decided that I would be the one to deliver. I typed the address into my phone and saw that it was an almost 30-minute drive just to get to this person's house. Since cooking 8 large pizzas takes a while to make, I was probably going to arrive at this person's house around 1 in the morning. I was a little annoyed that I had to stay so late, but I tried to look on the bright side of things and told myself that I was probably going to receive a generous tip given the lateness of the hour, the amount of pizzas that were ordered, and the distance from the shop. After about 35 minutes, the pizzas were finally done, so I put them in my car and set off toward the address. I arrived around 1 o'clock just like I predicted and drove my car up this steep driveway to an impressively big house. I sat in my car for a while and took in everything around me before getting out. Even though the house looked very nice, the front yard was in horrible condition. We don't get any snow from where I'm from, so the grass continues growing all year round, and this grass looked like it hadn't been cut for several months. That was the first thing that I noticed. The second thing was the fact that this gigantic house was located out in the middle of nowhere up on this hill. And from where I was sitting in my car, it looked like nobody was home. There were no cars in the driveway, and the lights in the house were not on. Yet this house ordered 8 large pizzas to be delivered. I was hesitant about getting out of my car, but I finally did and walked up to the front door in hopes that this would all be over soon. As I was walking up the sidewalk to the door, I noticed that the surrounding grass was even higher than I originally thought. It must have been neglected for some time because it was well past my knees and covered this person's entire yard. That takes some time to do. I was about to ring the doorbell when I saw a piece of paper taped to the door. "Dear Pizza Boy, please come in. Do not ring the doorbell. Thank you." That was strike 3 for me. I had a bad feeling about this house ever since I pulled in, but now I was certain that something fishy was going on. This definitely felt like some kind of trap to me, and even though I don't live in a bad neighborhood, I still didn't want to be abducted by someone. I disobeyed what the note said and rang the doorbell anyway. I waited a few minutes, but no one answered. I knocked on the door, then placed my ear closer to the wood to try and listen for any noises coming from inside the house. Hearing nothing, I just stood there on this person's porch in the middle of the night with 8 pizzas and no idea what to do next. I wanted to get back in my car and just tell my boss that no one was at the house, but that would really piss him off if I came back with 8 large pizzas and no money, even though it wouldn't be my fault. I stood there a little while longer, not moving until I finally reached up for the handle to go inside. But then I remembered something. A couple of weeks earlier, a young kid named Billy Holmes was abducted in broad daylight, not even 3 miles from where this house was. Like I said before, I don't live in a bad neighborhood, so when Billy got kidnapped, it was pretty big news in our town because we are not used to such events. I took my hand away from the handle, convincing myself that delivering these pizzas wasn't worth my life. I turned around and was about to walk back to my car when I heard someone say something from inside the house. "Come in!" someone shouted. The voice definitely came from a woman, but she sounded far away, like she was on the opposite side of the house or something. I went back to the door and knocked again. "Come in!" someone shouted. The voice definitely came from a woman, but she sounded far away, like she was on the opposite side of the house or something. I went back to the door and knocked again. "Come in, please, I'm upstairs," the woman's voice yelled. I eased up a little bit when I heard the voice, but I was still skeptical about the whole thing. The woman said, "I'm upstairs," implying that she was the only one there, which would be weird considering she ordered 8 pizzas. I told myself that I was just being paranoid, but there was a very small nagging feeling in the back of mine that I immediately suppressed. I slowly opened the door, making sure that the canister of pepper spray around my keychain was within reach. The inside of the house was very similar to the condition of the yard, unkempt. There were piles of garbage everywhere, and most of the house just looked like it hadn't been cleaned in a long time. It was weird that a person with such a nice house would treat it so poorly. I kept the front door open just in case I needed to make a quick escape, and then set the pizzas down on a table that was a few feet in front of me. There was a pile of mail stacked up in the center of table that was spilling over the edge onto the floor. Most of the lights in the house were off, except for the one in the room I was currently standing in and the one located at the top of a large staircase that was to my right. I heard the voice again. It was coming from the top of the steps, but I couldn't see anybody. "I'll be down in a minute," she said. Only this time it didn't sound right. Something was off about her voice. I hadn't noticed it when I was standing outside. But now, since it was much clearer, I could tell that it wasn't a woman's voice. Well, it was, but it didn't sound natural. It sounded like a man doing an imitation of a woman's voice. "Fuck this," I said to myself. "I'm out of here." There had been red flags going off ever since I parked my car, but this was the final straw. I left the pizzas on the table so they wouldn't trip me up if I had to start running. I turned around and was about to leave through the front door when I stopped dead. Right as I was exiting the house, I saw a shadowy figure dart across the sidewalk into the high grass covering the yard. Standing where I was in the doorway, I could make out the silhouette of something crouching in the grass off to my left about 20 yards in front of me. It was dark out, so I could barely make out the figure crouching in the yard, but from where I was standing, I could tell that there was something off about it. The thing had a very small head, barely bigger than that of a baby, but the rest of its body looked like it belonged to a full-grown man. Also, I wasn't 100% sure, but I thought that I could see a short, thick tail wagging behind this thing like a lion stalking its prey. I couldn't see its eyes, but I knew that it was looking at me. I was certain. I backed up into the house and closed the door, locking it firmly. Great, I thought. Now I'm stuck in here with the man upstairs pretending to be a woman. I reached into my pocket for my phone, but it wasn't there. Shit, I left my phone in my car. I was completely screwed, but I wasn't just going to lay down and die. I needed to find another exit. The stairs were to my right, so I went left down a large hallway, hoping to find a back door or something and make it back to my car somehow. The lights were off through the rest of the house, so I took it slow and steady and frantically searched around with my hand to make sure I didn't trip over a pile of junk lying on the floor. All my senses were turned up to 200%. I heard every little creak the house made and was navigating through the darkness as quietly as I could. I had no idea who else was in this house with me. I passed many boarded-up windows and locked doors, but I was not losing hope. I'd tear through one of those windows if it came to that. But for now, I wanted to remain quiet. I made it to the end of the hallway with only one door remaining. I twisted the handle, and it reluctantly started to turn with a sharp metal-on-metal noise that pierced through the silence of the house. I pushed on the door and it creaked open. There was a noise behind me like breaking glass, and I turned around to find that the light that was shining near the front door was out. "I know you're in here," the voice boomed from down the hallway, no longer sounding anything like a woman. I went into the now open room in front of me and shut the door. There was no lock, and I didn't have time to find the light switch, but I didn't need to. Several candles were burning throughout the room, their wax forming puddles around the floor from overuse. A pentagram was scrawled on the floor in what I could only imagine was blood, and there was a visceral smell throughout the room that burned my nose and caused my eyes to water. A chair was set in the middle of the pentagram with a pile of something, intestines, lying in the seat, leaking blood all over the ground. From behind the door, I could hear footsteps thundering down the hallway, at a steady, confident pace, like the man knew I was trapped. I looked around the room and noticed that moonlight was shining in through a window that was located on the back wall. Unlike all the other windows I passed, this one was not boarded up. I ran towards the window, acting before thinking, and dived toward freedom, just as I heard the door opening up behind me. The glass shattered around me, and I felt several sharp pains throughout my body as shards of glass sliced parts of my arms and face. I hit the ground hard, but was up in a flash and sprinted around to the front of the house, trying my hardest to make it through the tall grass without tripping. I looked back only once to see if I was being chased, but no one was following me. I saw the briefest glimpse of a figure standing behind the window that I broke through, but it didn't look like the man was going to take chase after me. He just stood there behind the broken window, and as I was rounding the corner of the house with my car now in sight, I could make out his heavy laughter from across the yard. I pulled open my car door and threw myself in with one quick motion. I started the car and nearly crashed into a tree as I sped away down the driveway. I didn't see that weird creature that was crouching in the grass earlier, but as I was driving away, I looked back in my review mirror and noticed that the front door of the house was open, even though I locked it before searching for a way out. I made sure that I was far enough away from that house before grabbing my phone and calling the police. I told the operator everything in a crazed, mad rush of words, and also mentioned that I was in need of medical attention. The operator told me that help was on the way, and not too long after that, I could hear police sirens approaching from the distance. After the police arrived, everything was just one big blur. I don't remember if I passed out or not, but all that I could recall are these small snippets of information, like riding in an ambulance as the paramedics tried to stop the bleeding from my cuts, and then being questioned by the police while I was in the hospital. Everything in between was blank. Most of my face made it out pretty unscathed because I blocked it using my arms. But I ended up getting somewhere in the realm of 70 stitches throughout the rest of my body, and the doctor said that I was lucky I hadn't bled out. I managed to find out what happened to the man that tried to abduct me after I was released from the hospital. Apparently, when the police arrived at the house, the man was sitting in his driveway with his hands up in surrender, as the house behind him burned down from a fire that he had intentionally started. The rest of the story I followed on my local news broadcast, as did basically every other person in that town. I was expecting the story to be like something right out of a horror movie. I figured that the man murdered the original owners of that house and then stayed there for a while practicing his weird rituals while the people he murdered rotted away in the backyard somewhere. What really ended up happening, though, was even more disturbing than what I originally thought. The owners of the house were a really wealthy old couple who were currently living in Florida. They used the house as a summer home at one point, but they hadn't been back for a very long time and were not planning on coming back, so they decided to give the house to one of their grandsons while they continued to pay the bills for it. The man that was there when I was delivering the pizzas was, in fact, the old couple's grandson. His name was Stanley Wardell, and he had been living in the house all by himself for over 2 years. All of his family said that they lost contact with Stanley about a year ago, but none of them made an effort to try and reconnect with him because Stanley was seen as the black sheep of the family. On the night that he was arrested, he admitted that he killed 3 people over the past 6 months and was planning on killing me as well. 2 of the 3 victims were an unlucky couple that had been visiting family from out of town. The other person was Billy Holmes, the little boy that I remembered had gone missing a few weeks earlier. During my statement to the police, I mentioned the creature that I saw hiding in the grass and also the pentagram that was drawn on the floor in the room with the window where I had escaped. But since Stanley burned his house down, nothing that I described was found. As for the creature with the small head and thick tail, the police said that I imagined it from the amount of shock that I was experiencing at the time. I wanted to believe them, but something inside me knew that they were wrong. And if all of this wasn't weird enough, the trial that took place after Stanley was arrested are when things really started to get disturbing. Even though Stanley admitted to killing the 3 people and was pleading guilty, he stood up in front of the courtroom the very first day of his prosecution and said that he was not the one that murdered those people, only that he was taking the blame for someone else. At first, the judge couldn't tell if Stanley was just trying to confuse the jury or if he really meant it. But either way, question after question was thrown at Stanley to try and figure out who this other person was. Stanley remained quiet, though, only opening his mouth to tell the judge that he was never going to say who really did it, and that they were never going to catch the real murderer. The judge was prepared to offer a shorter sentence if Stanley provided proof that someone else committed the murders, but he didn't budge. When asked why the other person wanted to kill those people, Stanley laughed at the judge dryly and said it was because it was hungry. The judge put off all of this nonsense as Stanley's way of trying to scare the jury and sentenced him to serve 3 lifetime sentences with no hope of probation. That was the end of it for a while. Stanley's name left the paper and the town started to recover from this horrible event, only to be thrown back into the chaos 3 weeks after the trial ended. Stanley Wardell was found dead inside his prison cell early one morning after he didn't come out for roll call. He had committed suicide by using a jagged piece of metal to cut his own throat open, but if you could believe it, that wasn't the weirdest part. A rumor had leaked out of the press a few days after the suicide, which stated that Stanley had written something on the walls of his jail cell in his own blood minutes before he died. From the source that I read, the words that Stanley had allegedly written were, "It will rise again." And the warning was accompanied by a crude drawing of some kind of creature whose features were not described. I looked through multiple stories, hoping to find a description of the monster that Stanley drew, dreading the fact that it might be what I saw in the front yard that night, but I never found anything on it. I'm still too terrified to sleep, and I am constantly looking over my shoulder, scared of what I might see every time I turn my head. I honestly do not know if I imagined seeing that creature in the front yard. I was under a lot of stress at the time, and fear can do crazy things to a person's brain. But I keep asking myself this. If the thing that I saw crouching in the grass that one night was not real, then why do I keep waking up in the middle of the night afraid? And if it is real, then fear is the least of my worries. Thank you for watching. If you found these stories gripping, don't forget to subscribe for more spine-tingling content. For another hair-raising tale, check out our suggested video. And if you're hungry for more eerie encounters, dive into our playlist featuring similar chilling narratives.